You're really a good writer. Thank you.
Margaret's book was so rich and full, so we could take just 2 sentences from it and then build a whole story around it.
Well, Margaret Atwood's novel, The Handmaid's Tale, is a beautiful book. It's really powerful, but there's not much plot in the book. It's very reflective and internal, interior. So starting with the first season, we did have to invent a lot of story inspired by the foundation that Margaret built, and her book remained a touchstone for us throughout the whole course of the series. It became like our Bible, and we always went back to the book for inspiration.
In episode 608, this season, for example, it starts with a quote from Margaret's book where she says, "They wanted us to look like we'd been dipped in blood, some fairy tale figure in a red cloak." And that episode is all about the dress and the power of the dress. And so it was so inspiring we just started with that. And then I continued the voiceover, June's voiceover, over images of making the Handmaid's Tale dress, which is this incredible symbol of, enslavement and oppression. But in this season, we reappropriate that and turn it into a symbol of liberation. And so that's an example of there's like this whole big story about how the handmaids in that episode weaponize the dress, and they have knives inside their dress that they then use. And it all comes to life out of, just a sentence or two from the book.
Yahlin and Eric, our showrunners, are so well researched in terms of the reality of what it is that we're trying to build, but also researched in terms of the tone that they want to hit. It's always very clear. Like if you have a question of should it be like this or like that, everyone always seems to be on the same page because they've thought about it so much.
I feel like we changed the rules so much in creating New Bethlehem, which was like we created a whole new island, which was a helpful story device for our characters. New Bethlehem is an island where women can read and they can work and rules are loosened. It was very much inspired by the idea of like what Hong Kong was supposed to be, which was sort of a more free offshoot of China, which is totalitarian. And it started just as a way to challenge our main character June by saying, June, you could come back here and you could see your daughter, and just like make her face an impossible choice about coming back to Gilead. I think what's great is that we really had the freedom to evolve Gilead and evolve the rules any way we wanted without any sort of restrictions or limitations.
In thinking beyond Gilead, we really expanded the show into Toronto in the middle of season 4. In Yahlin's episode, June finally escapes Gilead, which was a shock to me. I thought that would be the end of the show, but there were 2.5 seasons left of story because now we got to see June as a survivor of Gilead and as a refugee. And we got to explore that experience with her and the other refugees who were living in Toronto. So that opened up a whole new story for us, a whole new world to invent and explore. The series really was rich in that sense.
I think a lot of the lore and the visual motif of the series was all based in Toronto. So we created something that is meant to be the Boston area, but it really has its own world of the Boston area as seen through the lens of Toronto. So you'd be surprised there is some set extension for sure, but it's always based on what is actually in Toronto. And sometimes it's, for Chicago in season 4, it's just so expensive to destroy so much stuff. So we took over and helped with that. But in this season in particular, there wasn't a ton. I would say the 2 areas where we did a lot was the Waterford House, which did burn down in season 3. And we get a glimpse of it at the end of the season. We obviously could not burn down a house. So we had to research it and rebuild a burnt down house using the actual structure as the basis and the core. We scan it first. We do a 3D scanner, a digital LiDAR scan, which will give you a good idea of the structure of it. And then you have to rebuild that. And then, just as the team researches the production design and in the writing, We also do a ton of research, stock footage, Google, wherever. In these sorts of situations, we do try and stay away from AI just because don't take the most fun part away from us, you know? It really is. And it's part of the journey too, that like, you know, you think you've got it and then you find one piece of reference and then you show it to everybody and they're all like, oh my God, that's perfect. That's great. Like, for example, one of the things that we found was we shot it in the winter and someone had been going through and looking for all this burnt structure reference. One of the photos had all this like freshly fallen snow all over the place. And then we were like, that's perfect. So we have like a layer of freshly fallen snow on many of the surfaces because we found that. And I think that's, for me, I mean, a much bigger philosophical conversation, but for me, that's why we're in it. We're in it for that moment of discovery and how we can add to what everybody else in every other department's doing. And I think if you just type in a prompt and get something, it cheapens it. Feels like all the calories and none of the nutrition. The train at the beginning. Now, it's not traditionally visual effects. It's what we call virtual production. But basically, the whole episode takes place on a train. There's 3 ways to do it. One is actually shoot on a train. That actually is very expensive. And a lot of it takes place like right at sunset. And sunset lasts for like 30 minutes if you're lucky, right? So that's one way. The other way is green screen, where you shoot everything against screen and then you composite the plates in. But the problem with that is that it's a time-consuming process. And on a television show, you don't have the amount of time to do 300 shots like that. You know, to get it to look really good and as believable as it needs to be for a train scene, you need the time. And then the last one is what we ended up doing, and Lizzie fought for it. I'm so glad she did, which is an LED volume. So basically giant LED television panels that wrap the train. And then we shot plates in Ontario, about an hour and a half drive from Toronto, and we shot at sunset. And then we can you put it up on the screen and it's incredible. You would not know, right? And I forgot when I was watching it that, oh yeah, we weren't actually on a train. Like I was immersed in the story and it was so effective. There's a part at the end when there's this plane explosion and we really wanted to go for something quite unique and maybe not quite true to life, but it really needs to be this really beautiful moment. And what we ended up doing was getting a plane and simulating a bunch of different kinds of explosions, recording them all, and then sort of looking at them because we wanted interactive light on Elizabeth Moss as we're pointed at her face as she watches this explosion. But we were able to feed that information to the electrics and the grips so that they could have interactive lighting that matched what we had planned. Now, if we hadn't done that, it wouldn't have worked nearly as well because we would have had a flickering that doesn't match what the end image was supposed to be.
So as far as the fate of characters, yeah, there was a debate about a character this season. I won't get into the details maybe, but there is a character who might have been killed off in the very first episode. And there was a very charged kind of debate in the room about, do we save that person because there's more story, or do we go for the shock of getting rid of that person at the very beginning? And we decided that person had a lot more story and a lot more to contribute to the final season, so was spared. But that was a very intense few weeks of discussion.
Well, I will say just like another thing is that there was an idea on the table in season 2, I think, to kill one of our main characters. And that person ended up surviving all, through episode 9 of the next season. But there was like a big consideration about killing. And I think at the time we were thinking, well, to make this world real and feel real, you kind of have to get rid of someone. But also there was a combination of like, we love our characters so much and we can see so many juicy stories with them, so we don't want to kill them. And then also I just think we're softies who don't like to kill our friends and our amazing actors.
We have the most phenomenal cast. They're the most brilliant cast on TV, hands down. I may be biased, but they're all extraordinary. They're all wonderful to work with. They take their work very seriously, but they don't take themselves seriously. And, I could talk about any of them, honestly, but, I'll just talk about Yvonne Strahovski, because here we have this character who was an ice queen in the first season and, really brutal in the way she treated Offred. Yet, because of Yvonne's performance and the complexity and the underlying vulnerability that you could sense underneath that iciness, we knew that she had the depth as an actress to go beyond whatever we wrote on the page. And she was able to create a character based on our scripts that people are still invested in and people still care about. So she's just one. I mean, I can honestly go through each of our actors because they're all fantastic.
Bradley came in for what was originally like a 3-episode arc in season 2. And he just hit it out of the park with that character. And I remember writing the scenes that introduced him and thinking that it would be very hard for anyone to do this role because it was such a weird commander role where he's sort of rebellious, but also incredibly intimidating, but also charming. And then Bradley just really did all of that and more. And his voice, the way that Bradley speaks, the way he has Lauren speak, really defined and shaped how we wrote him. So he has a very specific kind of ironic, cutting, dry sense of humor. And it makes that character so fun to write because at that point, you were just imagining Bradley saying these things, and his voice is just like a mix of sort of irony and genius and obliviousness and silliness and humor. And it's such a tall order. And not only was Bradley so great at that, but then Bradley would also pitch lines that were fantastic. And so we would write Lawrence one way, and then he would Lawrence it up and make it even more sort of funny and ironic and sarcastic and bizarre in that way. He's a very singular character. And so Bradley's performance and his voice really affected that character.
It's more about being close to the director and just talking about it. They talk very openly about how it feels and what it's supposed to feel like. And it's really important if we're going to be taking the mantle or the baton through post, that we get that information, because everyone's going to be off the show by the time we're actually doing this work. Everyone's going on to something else. So we want to make sure, I think we're responsible for something very precious, which is sort of the core and the heart of the show. And we don't want to be going off and doing our own thing. We want to make sure that it is Bruce and Sheila and all the producers, and Lizzie, of course, are, working with us the whole way through.
Well, Elizabeth Moss pretty much shapes everything on the show. I mean, I have never seen anyone work as hard as Lizzie. And the acting is the least of it. She'll say, the acting, she just does in her sleep. It's she doesn't prepare, or she doesn't have to get into a space. She just is totally wonderful and sweet and pleasant, and then goes on camera and does the most devastating performance. And then they say cut, and she comes back and she's uber professional, mom at this point, working mom. It was very natural for her she started the show as an actress producer and then started directing. But for sure, her vision and her leadership of the set up in Toronto really shaped the whole culture of the show. Thankfully, our show has a reputation amongst shows, I think, for having a really warm, welcoming, happy set. So the actors, I think, feel safe and comfortable in terms of being able to do their best work. And that really does come from the number one on the call sheet, Lizzie, And then just as a producer, the other thing is that she is probably the fastest with a trigger finger on the phone. She just texts, so quickly. You ask her a question, the response comes right back. She's often jumps on things before we do. I mean, I don't know. I think she must get no sleep, but she literally does the job of 3 or 4 people, while the rest of us are just working to do our one job as best as we can.
She's actually really incredible. And she speaks not in our terms, not in visual effects terms, but what does it want to feel like and what does it want to look like? And then trusts us to kind of explain back, this is my understanding. And, we built a trust over however many years. It's a real give and take. It's a great relationship between, I see it the same thing with, all the other department heads. And I know everybody would agree with what I'm saying. She's one of the most collaborative and fun directors to work with. Honestly, you wouldn't know that she was an actor before, or that she is an actor. Like, just by the ways that she directs, she just has such a great way with people.
Lizzie directed the 9th episode, and this is really my image of her. It really exemplifies how much she's able to juggle so seemingly effortlessly, which is she had an enormous sequence to direct outside in the freezing cold. She had 500 extras. It was a really important sequence for the whole series. And she had to act up a storm at the same time. It was an intense moment for June. And in between takes, she's suspended for some reason above the ground about 10 feet. And she has an iPad dressed as a handmaid, and she's looking through the storyboards for the next day. I mean, there's not a moment wasted. And her child is also on set so that she can be a wonderful mom to her kid. So she is spinning plates like no one's I've never seen. It's just amazing. She's just really a force of nature. And she directed the hell out of this season. The episodes that she did, especially the last 2, I think are really spectacular work as a director.
It's funny, I get emotional talking about it because it was 9 years ago. I had just started my company. We might have exaggerated our size a little bit to try and get on the show. And season 1, there wasn't a lot for us to do except for this church, which was, got us an Emmy nomination. But then each season, they kept putting more and more trust in us and made us responsible for more and more things to contribute to this world. And I think seeing how much people love the show and what it meant to people, the pride that I get to say, yeah, I work on that show, it's really immense.
I think it was a show that was both of its time, but also, I hope, sort of universal and timeless, because the struggles that our characters went through on the show in terms of being, oppressed, having to deal with an authoritarian regime, having to deal with their rights being taken away, that is a struggle that people all over the world and throughout history have been struggling with. And in those extreme circumstances, you really see the humanity of people. You can really see what their characters end up being really like, and you can really see who people are. So I hope that those stories are instructive to people. I'm always just astonished at our fans, because honestly, like, women will come up to me and just start talking about the show and just start crying. It is astonishing to me how a lot of women really can relate to what is going on in the show, even though it is in such a different world. We're not living in Gilead.
I hope people remember it as a show that moved them emotionally, and it was a place they could go to that might have expressed some of the fears and anxieties and hopes that they might have been feeling in their real lives. And by doing that, took away a sense of hope and empowerment and inspiration that, that everything worth fighting for is worth fighting for, that you can't give up. So I think that would be a good legacy for the show.
Thank you both so much for your time. This was really amazing. I'm so excited for fans to kind of see behind the curtain of how the series was made and everything that goes behind it. Thank you again so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Pleasure.
Thank you so much for your time. This was awesome.
Thank you.